Hello and welcome to the very first tutorial of Mary 1840 St. Louis, Missouri. I'm so pleased you're joining me. I am thrilled with the response, and I know I have experienced quilters and brand new patchwork makers joining me, so I'm going to cover information to help everyone along in this journey. I'm Susan, and this is an episode of Susan Stanley Stitch in Time. This is something that I really wish I had been able to learn when I first started doing patchwork. It's made it so much more meaningful to me, and I hope it does that for you as well. If you purchased the kit, you have everything you need to complete the project using materials that are an approximation of what was available in 1840, including the fabric. The tools are also an approximation of what would have been available, and I will be explaining all of this in more detail on Floss Tube episodes and Stitched Story episodes. If you did not purchase a kit, at the very end of this video, I'm going to go over what you need to complete your project using contemporary materials and tools. So stick around. Everybody, no matter what, will need, I did not include in your kit, I did not include a thimble, and thimbles are very personal. I'm going to go into a detailed explanation of thimbles on a Floss Tube episode coming up next, number 37. You'll need a pincushion, you'll need shears, and you'll need a designated place for your patches, for your patchwork, to keep it laid out, keep it safe. Kitty cats love patchwork, let me tell you. If you are using these materials, these 1840 materials, I am going to, like I said, give you an explanation of why these were used and the methodology behind them based on that time period. Now, this doll quilt is composed of 24 different fabrics that I have accessed that are reproductions or very close reproductions of work in the textile industry from the 1840s. We're dealing with pre-industrial revolution. Your doll quilt measures 12 by 16. This doll quilt method that I'm going to take you through uses absolutely no sewing machine. Sewing machines were not invented yet. They were not available yet to the general population. There were prototypes and models in the works, but they were not available to the general population. Everything was done by hand. This method also does not have a standard seam allowance. In 1840, there was no standard for measurement, and there was no standard seam allowance. And if you have been a patchworker or use a sewing machine, you know that for garments, typically we use a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and for patchwork, a 1/4 inch. This method doesn't use that. There is no knot used in this method, but if you're working with the child and they're having trouble, please go ahead and make a knot. You can always snip it off. This method uses a single thread, so there will be back stitching involved, and that is because there is no bobbin and upper thread interlocking and securing and strengthening your stitches. This is the way we strengthen it, is by using the back stitch. You don't sew into the seam allowance in this method, and I'm going to show you a little video to explain what I mean by seam allowance, because there are some new terms for people who have not done this kind of work before. To clarify some terms, I want to show you a few things. First of all, I'm referring to the cut edge. That's right here. I'm referring to the stitching line, which is going to be right here, and is actually this red thread. That's the stitched line. The seam allowance is this little flap that goes from the stitched line to the cut edge. So when we talk about seam allowance, that's what we're referring to. This side doesn't have a seam allowance yet because we haven't sewn it into anything. So today you're going to learn to cut out your pieces. You're going to make 2 patches. That's 2 pieces put together, and you will set those aside in preparation for next week's tutorial. Each block in this quilt has 4 pieces, 2 of one color and 2 of another. So you're going to cut out 2 of one color and 2 of the other, and all we're going to work on today is sewing 2 of them together. All right, let's get started. Let's take a look at the materials and supplies you will need to do patchwork in an 1840s experience. This is what likely would have been available at that time. You'll need a pencil. You'll need a pincushion with your number 9 crewel work needle. You'll need your thread, which is going to be the 103 silk, and I've wrapped it in the papers. You'll need a thread waxer, a thimble of your choosing. You'll need pins, and I'm going to take 3 out and get them ready in my pincushion. Take them out of the pin papers so they're ready to go. Then I'm going to put them right back in here because they are so valuable. You'll need your tin template for tracing and cutting your shapes. You'll need your Bristol Paper template. You'll need some dressmaker shears. And then, of course, you will need your fabric. And for this project, the kit included 1840s curated collection of fabrics. So you gather your supplies and we're ready to go. So the first thing you're going to do is, from your stack of fabrics, you're going to pick 2 contrasting fabrics that are pleasing to you. And so today I'm going to choose this one because I find it fun and interesting, and I think I'm going to pair that together to make my 4 patch. So the first thing that Mary in our doll quilt story, or her mother or an older person in her life likely would have done, is to just make sure the fabric was flat. Just press it out, either finger press or ironing using 1840s materials. And then Mary likely would have had some adult cut this out for her, but since we're imitating her experience, we're going to cut it out today. And so she would have had something, either a tin template or another square of fabric, and she would have just placed it on the back, pressing it down and then lightly drawing the line all the way around. On each of the scraps, and you'll need 2 pieces from each scrap. Set that aside. Now for a child, this would have been quite a task. And we have tools today that make this so much easier. If I was doing this today, I would use something underneath the fabric to keep it from pulling and stretching. You know, and maybe she would have butt that right up against the line. I don't know. She also might have just held this up and cut around it. Or maybe the adult helping her would have decided she wasn't quite ready for dressmaking shears. But if she was, or if someone who was helping her was going to cut, she would cut this out right on the line. So we're going to do that for all 4 pieces. All right, the next thing we need to do is thread our needle. Thread today is sold on spools or in hanks or skeins. In 1840, thread was sold in papers, and it was already cut to the length that you would need for stitching. So we're going to pull out a thread. This is the 103 silk that I wrapped and created my own 1840s thread paper. Information on that is linked below. We have our number 9 crewel needle, and we're going to thread it and get ready for sewing. Okay, so our needle is threaded, and now we're going to put on our thimble. And we're going to wax our thread to condition it, make sure it doesn't snag or twist. We're just going to hold it down with our thumb and pull it through the wax. I do that a couple times. Okay. We'll set our needle aside while we prepare our fabric. So we're going to take 2 pieces and line them up as best we can. You can see these are not exactly the same size. That's okay. The technique we're going to use that was common in the 1840s for young children. And if you want more information on this, there are links below to floss tubes that discuss it. We're going to put our Bristol paper as close to the middle as we can. Determine with our eye, leaving about 1/4 inch all the way around. And then we're going to finger press a crease line, which will be our sewing line. So we're going to finger press till we get a really nice, as crisp as possible line. We're going to do that on 3 sides, so we have a nice X in the corner here, so we know how to start. This little paper was invaluable to the learners, the early stitchers, and it would have been saved. Okay, and we'll set that aside. And so now you can see we have a nice crease, and we have a point for beginning and a point for an end. Let's take a closer look at really getting that nice crisp fold and the first row of stitches using a red thread so you can see it nice and clearly. So we're going to take our opposing fabrics, and I've just picked two other fabrics that I had. We're going to place our template roughly in the middle as best we can. We're going to fold both of those over together using your fingernail or just your fingers to press. Finger pressing was very common. It's still, people still use it now. Go all the way across, right? And then we're going to do the same thing on the sides because we want to get that nice crisp corner. And I'm just showing this to you again, just in case, you know, this is kind of a different concept than how we stitch today, but this is very traditional. Right? So now can you see that X there in the corner? All right, so we have a nice folded line. And this right here from that X to that X, that crease, that's our stitching line. And if Mary was fortunate enough to have pins, they would have been treated very valuably. They would have been cared for, and possibly she would have pinned the beginning and the end, going right in at that X where the top and side creases meet. Okay, and then she would have had her needle at the ready and she would have been able to begin stitching. And so you will go right in at that X, take out your pin, put it in your pincushion, take 2 tiny stitches forward, pull your thread through. We just want 1, so we'll pull this out, and then we'll take 2 tiny stitches back. And I'll tell you what, if you have never pieced with silk, it is a wonderful experience. Go right in where we began. And now we're ready to continue all the way to the end. We'll take a couple stitches here and pull it just to make sure, yeah, that's secure. We didn't have to make a knot. And here we go. And we're going to stitch right on that creased line. That's our guide. And we'll take about 3 or 4 stitches. We want to make tiny stitches about 1/16 of an inch apart, 1/8 of an inch. Over that, you're going to have problems with your block holding together. And Mary would have learned that. And now we're going to take a stitch back. And we're going to keep going all the way till the end. So we're almost to the end where our pin is. We're going to take a stitch and then come right up where the pin is. Pin goes in the pincushion. We'll take 2 stitches back to secure that final point. And then 2 stitches forward, coming out right on that intersection. And snip our thread. And there we have our first 2 patch. And you can open it up. You can still see those creased lines. We'll open it up, we'll finger press it with this seam allowance toward the dark, even though we might not be paying attention to that later, but that looks like a nice secure seam. It's not going to pull apart. Right, we're going to start right at the cross section, right in the corner of that crease going across the top and the crease going down the side. Stick our needle in, we can pull our pin out, and we're going to make 1 stitch. And like I said, if it's too difficult to not have a knot, you can make a knot. You'll want to trim it off because that adds so much bulk to your seam. Okay, we're going to go in right where we started, come back right up in that same spot. And now we'll go right in between that stitch, right in the middle of that stitch. Okay, and now we'll start stitching 3 or 4 stitches, and we want to make sure that our needle is coming out on the crease on the back. So let's check it. It's actually up a little bit, so let's make an adjustment here. Just pull that into place and start stitching again. Okay, that's about how long your stitches should be. You'll see the needle poking through or shining through, that's the length of your stitch. Okay, and we'll push that through. And now we'll make a back stitch. And we're staying right on that creased line. And you can see the red thread should be buried right on that crease line. Now, I'm just using this red thread so you can see it a little bit better. So it's a little more obvious. And you can see the stitches are not perfect, but they're fine. They're consistent, they're small enough, they're on the crease. And we're just going to keep going all the way to the end, and we're going to tie it off just like we started. So let me keep going here. Take out the pin. Go back one. And start weaving that needle on to the, let's take a look at the back. Yep, we're still staying on our crease. Crease is kind of faint now, but it's still there. Okay, we're getting closer to that point where the pin goes in, and that's exactly where we want to land. So let's keep stitching. Go back, take a back stitch, keep stitching. Come out right where the pin is. Take out the pin. Take a back stitch. Come right out where we just came, right where the seam or where this crease is on the side and the top, right where they meet. And then we'll go back a couple. And we're done. We can trim that off. Leave about, oh, I don't know, 1/4 inch. You can trim this one down if you'd like. About 1/4 inch. And that's our seam in red thread. In closing, we made 2 patches. We cut our pieces out and we sewed them together. So here are two patches, and here are two patches. These, after they are sewn together, will make a block. Next time, we're going to look at how to put those 2 patches together to complete your block. So I hope you have lots of happy hours with your needle and thread. And if you did not purchase a kit and would like to hear about the supplies that I suggest, please stick around. And if you did purchase a kit and want to listen, you're welcome as well. So if you did not purchase a kit, many of you will probably have on hand some cotton thread. I recommend that you really be careful that your cotton thread is new and fresh if you're using it, and that it is 30 weight or higher. Now, if you would like an approximate experience or just a very wonderful, pleasant experience stitching, I recommend that you try this silk that I'm using. And I do have it on my website for sale in packets, color packets, starter packets. I have light, medium, and dark, but I have used other silks in the past and I have not been happy at all with the results. This silk is extremely pleasant to work with. So just if you're interested in trying that experience, you will need a number 9 crewel needle or a number 9 sharp, something that can puncture the cotton fabric easily. You need thin patchwork pins, and I recommend the Karen Kay Buckley super fine patchwork pins. I will be linking all this below for you as well. You need a 2.5-inch template for drawing the line on your fabric for cutting. And there is a 2.5-inch template available to purchase at needlework, well, probably big box stores and quilt shops. It's an omni grid and it measures 2.5 inches. It's made of hard template plastic. As you draw around the edges, there's nothing's going to distort. It's very sturdy. You will need a mechanical pencil or some kind of a pencil. Now, in our 1840s experience, we used a wooden pencil because that's what was available, and this would have been sharpened with, a pocket knife. You also need to have a 2-inch piece of Bristol paper or chipboard or something that's about the width of a heavy-duty cardstock to fold your fabric over. You don't want it to be too thick because that will distort the size of what's available on the inside. You need 24 pieces of fabric if you want to do the same scrappy layout. Each piece of fabric needs to measure about 3 by 6, but of course it can be larger, that's fine. You need a backing fabric that is 16 by 20. You need a piece of batting that is 16 by 20. You need a piece of binding fabric, which I'm going to say you need a 3-inch piece by width of fabric. We're going to cut that down in the binding episode, but for now that's all you need. And of course you need scissors, or if you use rotary tools, you need your cutting mat, ruler, and rotary cutter. So thank you for joining me, and of course enjoy cutting out all those squares and piecing little 2 patches together, and I'll see you next time. I want to show you, if you are a person who have never stitched a thing before, I want to give you a first stitches, if you've never taken a stitch, mini tutorial, just really up close and personal, so you can get a really good reference point for what this is involved, what this involves. I've taken a scrap piece of fabric. You can use something in your kit if you have the kit. If you don't have the kit, any piece of fabric will do. You probably want to press it so it's easy to work with. I'm not going to use a thimble for this because I know starting out using a thimble is challenging. I will encourage you to try using a thimble later on, because as we get to other aspects of making this quilt, the thimble really helps push the needle through the fabric. But for this, I'll just show you exactly what you need to do to make your very first stitches. We're going to take our piece of fabric, and if you have your Bristol ruler, if you have the kit, you'll want to open that up. And if you don't have a Bristol ruler, you're going to want to use a piece of cardstock, or you can see how wide that is. A manila envelope, file folder is a good weight of paper. And you're going to want to place that, you know, just about a 1/4 inch, just eyeball it. This doesn't have to be perfect. We're just making a folded line so that we can see where we're going to make our stitches. And we're going to do exactly like I showed you in the video, except we're going to make this long practice line. Okay, so you just want to keep going over that until it's nice and folded and crisp, because that'll just help you know where to stitch, keep it going in a straight direction. And remember, this is just practice. So there's, you know, you're going to rip it right out. Try it again. And I think good practice would be to start at one end and go to the other end if you have a length that's about 11 or 12 inches. And I bet from this beginning point to the end, you're going to notice, oh, this is not so bad, and my stitches are looking better, and I'm kind of getting the hang of it. I think this would really be helpful if you're working with a child before you dive in. You can cut your pieces and be ready, but I think this practice stitching is always good. When I'm getting ready to hand quilt or anything like that, I usually do some warm-up stitching. It's just a good idea. So get your fold. There we have our folded line. I think you can see that. Okay, so we'll just, if we have to, we can just crisp it up a little bit. Now, it might be easier to see from the back actually with that. There we go. And if you're really having trouble, you can draw a line, which is what I did here. I just put a ruler down and took a pencil and drew a line. So either one will do. And I think since it's easier to see this from the back, we're going to stitch from the back. All right, I'm using red thread. If you have your kit, you can thread your needle with some of the red thread that's in the kit. If not, just pick a color that you can see. And this is how you stitch. And I'm going to show you 2 ways to make your stitches. The first one is poke and stab, just like you do with cross stitch. You poke it in, you bring it back up. You poke it in, you stab it back up. All right, so we're going to poke in from the top and on that line. Right there, we're going to poke it through. See that? It's coming out the back, just like you would with cross stitch. Now I'm going to pull this up to here and leave a tail. If you want to make a knot for your practice, go right ahead. If you don't make a knot, you can just snip the knot and pull it out to try again. But so let's hold the tail. Okay, now our needle and our thread is on the back of the fabric. It's on the blue. So if you're a cross stitcher, you can just imagine, okay, if you're moving over 2 threads with your linen, how far would that be? Well, depending on the count, it would be probably about that far from the thread that you poked in. So we're going to poke it up. Right? We're going to do that again. We're going to poke it in. And you're just holding the fabric. It's loose in your hand. It doesn't have to be taut. It doesn't have to be tight. It's not in a hoop. It's okay. The way you control this is by how the tension on your thread, not your fabric. All right, so now we're going to come up again from the back. All right, so we came in from the back. We're going to poke up. And we're going to poke down. And you want to pull it, but you don't need to pull it super tight. poking down. Oh, and the tail got caught. That's okay. That happens. All right, and now our thread is on the back. We're going to poke. Our thread came out the back. So now we're going to poke from the back up to the top. We're calling this our front because that's where we started. Now we're going to go from our top back. All right, now we're on the blue side. We're going to go from the blue side to the white. And you can see I'm not having to push really hard to make this go through the thread. It's going through nicely. All right, now we're going to make a back stitch, and which means we're not going ahead another stitch. We're going to go backwards, right to that stitch that's behind, and poke in and pull out the back. Okay, now we're on the back. We're going to come up to the front. So we're on the back. We're going to poke up. We're on the top. Now we're going to go to the back, poke down. We're on the back. We're going to poke up. And you can see my stitches aren't perfect. They're not exactly the same size. It doesn't matter. We're practicing, and eventually we'll get there where they're more even and consistent. You don't want them to be a 1/2 inch wide, but at this point I think we're just poking and stabbing and they'll be whatever they are. I'm not going to worry about it. I think the camera wants to focus on that. There we go. Okay, we're on the back, so we're going to poke up to the front from the back. We're just making running stitches. This is called the running stitch, and this would be the very first thing that a child would learn, or that a new stitcher would learn. Okay, we're on the top, we're going to the back. And it's actually pretty relaxing. Now you can see if I pull this too tight, what happens? The fabric gathers up. No worries. Just pull it apart. It's all good. Okay, so we're on the back. We're going to poke up from the back to the front. We've made 3 stitches again, so we're going to take a back stitch, which means we're going back to the one we made before, and we're poking down to the back. Okay. Now, I want to show you another way, which is what I showed you in the video previously. I showed you a little bit of the poke and stab, but mostly I was showing you, we'll pull this up to the top, how to load your stitches onto the needle. So what I like to do is load 3 stitches onto the needle, then pull it through, then take my back stitch. So let's look at how that happens. You're going to poke the needle in just part way. In fact, just about that much. We're not pulling it through yet. We're going to hold the fabric in our hand, I have it in my left hand and my needle in my right hand. And we're going to angle the needle up. You see that? See it poking through the fabric, making that little mound? It's making that little mound, and now we're going to poke it up on the top about the same distance that we poked it through on the back. And now we're going to angle the needle again and push it out about that far on the back. And we're going to angle the needle and poke it through onto the front. And we have 2 little humps. That means we have 2 little stitches. Let's do it one more time. We're gonna angle it to the back, let it poke out, angle it to the front. You see how the fabric is weaving onto the needle? All right. So we have 1, 2, we'll do one more angle to the back, angle to the top, and now we're going to pull it through. We've just made our 3 stitches. Okay, which means we get to make a back stitch. Let's go back. Okay, we'll pull it through. All right, let's try that again. This is weaving it onto the needle. We're still making a running stitch. We're doing the exact same thing. We're just using a different method. Now, for starting out, I would pull it to the back and then pull it to the front. And now let's start your weaving it onto the needle. So we'll go in from the top to the back, part way. Rock the needle up so that it comes through the fabric about that far, 1/4 inch. Rock it down so it goes to the back about 1/4 inch. Rock it again up so it comes up 1/4 inch. Rock it again back 1/4 inch, and you can see my fingers kind of pushing, helping assist the needle with my finger, getting that fabric onto the needle. One more time. Up, rock back, and let's rock up. And now we have our 3 stitches, and we're going to pull it through. Okay, and now we're going to make our back stitch. Sometimes it catches on the fabric. That's okay. You just take your needle or your fingers and move it out of the way. I find it easier if I'm already holding my needle to just take that thread and pull it away with my needle. But okay, let's do the poke and stab again. So now we've done poke and stab, and we've done the rocking and feeding the needle, weaving the fabric onto the needle. Let's do poke and stab. So we're in the back. We're going to poke up, we're going to poke down and pull it through. We're going to poke up. You might feel a rhythm, you might get a little bit faster, it might take some time. It's okay. There's no rush. You can take as long as you want to make this doll quilt. There's no rules. And you want to feel good about it. And I guarantee you, this stitch here is going to be a lot different than the one at the very end of this row. So come up. We're going to rock, poke down. We're going to poke up. Okay, and now we're going to, oop, that one's kind of funky. Well, that's all right, I'll just leave it. We'll make a back stitch. All right, so I got way off there. That happens. Got the camera in front of me. You know, those are not the most beautiful stitches. It's okay. We're practicing. All right, let's try feeding it onto the needle one more time. Okay, we're poking up from the top. Now, this is where you would use your thimble to push it up. It's pretty easy to go through one layer of fabric. It's really not going to hurt your hand. You want to just be careful that the needle, especially the eye, does not go down under your fingernail. Ask me how I know. Okay, let's try weaving it onto the needle. We're still doing the running stitch. We're still doing our 3 stitches and 1 back stitch. All right, so we're on the top of the fabric. We're going to go in on that creased line. We're going to come out the back. Make sure you can see that. We're going to pull that about that far. Okay, I'm not going to show you the back now this time. I'm just going to show you the rocking. So you can see the little mound. And now I'm poking up. And now I'm rocking down. And it's sticking out the back. And now I'm rocking up. And I see how I'm pulling it back to feed it on so it's not so far apart. And then I'm rocking down and pushing it out the back. And now I'm rocking up and I'm kind of pushing the fabric on with my thumb and my other finger, and then I'm rocking down and I'm rocking up. Okay, and that should be 3 stitches. And now I'm going to make my back stitch. I'll just poke and stab that through. Okay, so that was a good practice run, and I would just keep doing that until you feel comfortable and confident about those running stitches. And after you feel brave, which, you know, don't pressure yourself, but don't be afraid to try. You have your pieces that you've cut out, because we looked at that in the tutorial. You have your opposing fabrics, and you notice that I have the pretty side up. So the pretty side, which is the front or the top of the fabric, which we call in fabric land or in sewing, this is the right side of the fabric. Turn it over. This is called the wrong side of the fabric. And so to make your seam, we have our right sides up, and we're going to make the right sides give each other a big hug. All right, they're going to be put together like that. Right sides together. So you should see the wrong side on the top and the wrong side on the bottom. The wrong side of the fabric. And if you peek inside, you should see your 2 right sides of fabric. Okay. Now, you want to get your Bristol paper. You can take your ruler or your square, because we're just going to practice going along this. We're going to make our line just like we did in the earlier video. You can hear my thumbnail going across that, creasing it. Have a nice firm crease. Try to get used to using pins. You will need them. We're going to poke the pin right in at that crease. It's going to go through the top and the back, and then we're going to pin it like this. Come out through the bottom, okay? And we'll do that on this side too. We're going to stick the pin in, and it came out the back. And there we go. All right, and now we're going to practice the running stitch with 2 layers of fabric. This is just practice. We don't have to keep it if we don't like it. We didn't use our square, so we don't have our side guidelines, so it's good. We're just practicing. Now, this is when you might want a thimble, but the sooner you get used to a thimble, the better. But I do know that it's tricky business going from stitching without a thimble to a thimble. And I will talk about that. Okay, in a floss tube, go in from the top, poke it in, poke and stab. It doesn't feel a whole lot different from stitching 1 layer. Hold your end, come up. Next to that, just imagine that you're making an X. If you're a cross stitcher, imagine that you're making an X. So you're going to go in next to it about that distance of maybe 2 linen threads. And if you're not a cross stitcher, you're just going to imagine your needle coming up just about that far away from the thread that went in. Okay, so let's pull it up. And now we're going to poke, stab it through both layers. We're pulling it all the way through the back. Don't pull too hard, you'll lose your tail. If you do, and you've done that one too many times, just tie a knot, it's all right. Okay, now we're going to come up. So here's the back. We're going to go in about that far away from the stitch that's on the back. And we can tell because, see this stitch right here? That's where that went in. We want to just be a little bit farther down the road from that stitch, but not too far. Okay. We're going to go in again right next to that about, oh, I don't know, you know, just play with it. Just see if you can make your stitches about that big, but just starting out, just make some stitches. It's fine. We're going to go up. And now we're going to go from the top to the back. And we're going to come out from the back, the bottom to the top. And we've made 3 stitches, so now we're going to make a back stitch. So we're going to go in right on that stitch. Let's see if I can get a good visual on that. Okay, I didn't go forward, I went back. All right, now I'm ready to go forward. So I'm on the back. Now sometimes when you're starting out, it gets confusing if you're on the back or the front and you end up going like this and looping over and stitching from the front and you end up with the loop. Don't feel bad, we've all done it. Okay, you're in the back, you poke up from the back to the front, poke down. Okay, now let me come up and let's try weaving 2 pieces of fabric onto the needle and see how that feels. All right, so you're gonna go in, about that far. We don't pull it all the way through, remember? We're just gonna rock it up, about that much needle showing. Rock it down, about that much needle showing out the back. Rock it up, rock it down, rock it up, and only that much needle is coming out each time. Okay, and I have 3 loops on there. I'm going to do 1 more, and now I'm going to pull it out the back. Right? That was 3 rocking stitches, and then let's come up and make our back stitch. We're going to go backwards. All right, and we're done with our first little row of stitches on our practice block. And see why you have the right sides together? Because when you open it up, they are what show without the seam allowance. There's no seam allowance on the front. I hope that was helpful. If there are any other things that you would like more in-depth instruction on, please let me know. Please email me. Please contact me. I want this to be successful and I want you to enjoy this process. Again, be patient with yourself, be kind, give yourself time to learn a new skill. And until I see you next time, make happy stitches. Bye-bye, friends.